a burning city will be debited to the carbon emission cap of a state? Is it the one where the city burns, or is it the one who has set the city afire? This is not a very relevant question, I'm afraid. So, but nevertheless, there are some environmental agreements which may remain relevant, and I'm always looking for examples, and if somebody has a good example of that, most welcome. The nice thing about law is that customary law sometimes develops beyond the treaty law. Treaties are often formulating a customary law as it is when the treaty is concluded. But development continues, and it may get beyond the treaty. One of these developments where customary law has gone beyond what we find in the first additional protocol to the Geneva Conventions is the principle of due regard. Those who decide upon an attack have to pay due regard to the environmental consequences of that attack. Now here we are getting the situation. The conservationists will say, well, this is too weak. The military say, well, this is nonsense, and we are in between. I'll come back to this situation, but I think it's a very good case to say that this due regard principle has become a principle of customary law, and the question then is, what does it mean? What does due regard mean? And that is one of the focuses of the work of our commission. We want to develop scenarios in contact with military and environmental specialists to find out what in typical war scenarios due regard for the environment may mean. And that could then be translated into military manuals. It could be translated into rules of engagement and what have you. So this will be one of the major program points of our commission, because there is a lot of potential. The other important, it's not a development, but it's really an awareness of a potential. Many or even most elements of the environment are part of the civilian world. Because they're what is called civilian objects. Because the definition of the military objective is limited. The military objective is something which contributes to the military effort of the enemy. And, you know, even the dangerous tiger in the jungle doesn't contribute to the military effort of the country where this poor tiger happens to live. So nature is civilian by nature. But the problem there is that it is very easy to transform a civilian object into a military objective. You could see that during the Vietnam War, where what happened, the use of herbicides during the Vietnam War in the late 60s was really one of the scandalizing events which triggered this debate about preservation of the environment during armed conflict. I hate to say, this jungle, which was destroyed by herbicides, was a military objective because it contributed to the military effort of the enemy, because it provided cover for the enemy, which was approaching military bases. That was the reason why this was used. So they were military objectives. And their very situation had made them a military objective. If a couple of soldiers march through a protected area, that protected area becomes a military objective. Because something like what you call interdiction fire, this is legitimate. The neutralization of the area, I'm using the technical term, is a big military advantage. So the point is how to prevent that from happening. And here we are at Wolfgang's old idea to have protected areas explicitly set aside, which would mean they have to be demilitarized, because once soldiers are in there, the other side would not refrain from shooting. And then we have the point: how do you make sure that this is demilitarized, free from military storages and so on? And how is this designated? Wolfgang has had the good idea, and I still think it's a good idea, although not everybody agrees with that, that the Security Council could determine certain protected areas where parties to a conflict should keep out. This is a possibility. This is one possibility. I mean, to convince the Security Council of something is not a matter of course. They have some very good members and some difficult members. They are called the permanent members of the Security Council. And they agree on most things, if only they agree not to. So this is an uphill battle as far as the Security Council is concerned. And the other way is, of course, that parties to a conflict agree on a designation. And what we want to do, following Wolfgang's advice, is to draft a treaty on ways of designation, which will contain both elements: parties designating areas at the Security Council, and trying to sell that to the community. And then coming back to the question of possible forum. So my last point concerning the problems and the rules protecting the environment is another layer of the aspect environment as a civilian object. IUCN congresses have discussed that. In Barcelona there was a resolution on forests being set afire by artillery, which was not directed against the forest but spread over to the forest. The forest was not the objective, but nevertheless was affected by this exchange of artillery fire. So that is what is called a collateral damage. That's a term of art. Collateral damage, and Antonio is not here, our next chair now, he's not here, but in the meeting of the steering committee, he coined a very nice word for that: green collateral damage. The legal point there is collateral damage is inadmissible, and an attack is unlawful if it causes a damage, a collateral damage, which is excessive in relation to the military advantage anticipated. Proportionality. Now this is a technical instrument for lawyers, proportionality. We love proportionality in many respects because proportionality is a rule of reason. So that's something very good. But on the other hand, it's something very complex, difficult, where it is used in national law, national constitutions, and so on. You have the courts to say, and afterwards you say, well, this was disproportionate and this was proportionate. That is not so easy when we come to the law of war. But it is a possibility. If we look, for instance, at the report of the prosecutor, submitted to the prosecutor of the Yugoslavia Tribunal on damages caused by the NATO bombing campaign 99, the Yugoslavia Tribunal set up by the Security Council was competent to deal with this question because the competence of the court at that time at least was open-ended as a matter of time. So the court was competent and the prosecutor asked a specialized committee, now please report to me, shall I open a prosecution against NATO commanders? And this commission started evaluating what was happening, and in a way that was very encouraging for us. The first point discussed was damage to the environment caused by NATO bombing. And the relevant yardstick was proportionality. So it is there. It is already there. But we must make clear, and here we are back to our task as a specialist, what could proportionality mean in this context? How can we make sure that environmental damage enters into what is called, I'm sorry for the word, I have not coined it, but it is used, the proportionality equation. Where you have on the one hand of the equation the military advantage, on the other the damage to the civilian world. Yeah, we have cases on that because there's one very special type of court. It's not really a court, it's a type of adjudicating body. The United Nations Claims Commission, which awarded damages for the damage caused by Iraq in the Iraq-Kuwait war, and there is the F claims is a big part of the jurisprudence of that claims commission on environmental damages. So we have something. These are general notions of both environmental law and law of war, and they can become, that is the point, they can become operational, and I think the Commission has a role to play in helping to make them operational. That brings me to, this ends my presentation of where we are, where we could go, where the potential is. And my last point is political leverage. How? Because if we know what it should be, that does not mean that military and political decision makers know what it should be. So what can we do for that? This is what I call the question of political leverage. If we come up with a draft treaty, how do we set it? Where do we set it? Now, there is something interesting going on. The International Committee of the Red Cross has the mandate to think about necessary developments of international humanitarian law. They have done that several times. And the last time they submitted a proposal, summer last year, on the fields where that development was needed, and nice surprise, this time, in contradistinction to what they had done in the early 70s, this time, one of the points was the environment. And great surprise, this idea of a treaty on protected areas, of designated protecting areas, is to be found in the speech of the President of the International Committee of the Red Cross, making these proposals. Now, not surprising, states said, oh, well, this is not really a priority issue, let's talk about something else. The something else is important, I agree, this is the better implementation and enforcement of international humanitarian law, nothing against that, and it is the question of detainees, and there's much to be said about that, think about Guantanamo. So the other items are not irrelevant, but we have to see that the momentum which the whole issue has gained by the proposal made by the United States is really kept. And it is nice to know that at least the ICRC has read what we have done, because this was not as a footnote, but was a clear reference to what we had done. So we must seek an entrance into these processes with our new ideas and the new ideas which we are developing. The other forum which will be important is the International Commission. Whatever the Commission does, these proposals, if it comes up with an instrument, a treaty, draft, rules, it must not necessarily be a treaty. But if the recently, well, not so recently, about 10 years ago, the International Law Commission has drafted articles on state responsibility. And they refrained from proposing that to be a treaty. That would have, at the time, killed the project. But everybody cites these these articles as being the law. So there's a lot of potential in the International Law Commission, and has also been encouraging for us to read the proposal made to the International Law Commission to deal with the subject. It refers again to the work which we have done, and that is an explicit footnote. So there is another avenue where our thought could enter into the international political process, and your Commission will certainly try to keep these doors open. We would hope that from this workshop we get more inspirations, more ideas how this could be done. Thank you for your attention.
We have a few minutes for questions if members of the audience. There's a microphone up there if you want to go first, and then and when you do, please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I'm Kefing Sissoko from IUCN Mali, South Africa. First, I want to say that it's very important to distinguish the kind of natural resources which can be considered in that kind of conflict. You have land, you have forests, waters, and also wildlife. So in case of Mali, actually we have one conflict, and in the rebellion zone you have elephant. And now all the administration leave this zone, and there is no project anymore. There is no management of the project anymore. So now actually it is only the population, local population who are in this zone. That kind of case is very difficult because we also had some information that the rebels are killing now the animals, and in this way I think it's a very big case of consider the wildlife in the conflict zone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sir?
My name is Jeff McNeely. I was former chief scientist at IUCN, and now I'm a candidate for the chair of the World Commission on Protected Areas. So I really appreciate the work that you guys are doing. But I have one challenging question for you, and that is, how do we deal with the non-state actors? So the conventions are great, you know, and I've looked at them with great care. I'm writing a book about war and biodiversity, and it's the non-state actors that I'm worried about. The guerrillas, or maybe it's better to say guerrillas, who hide in the forest. So what do you suggest that we do with the non-state actors?
And up front here?
My name is Eladio Fernandez.